Martello Towers, sometimes known simply as Martellos, are small defensive forts that were built across the British Empire during the 19th century. From the time of the French Revolutionary Wars onwards, most were coastal forts. They stand up to 40 feet high and typically had a garrison of 1 officer and 15 to 25 men. Their round structure and thick walls of solid masonry made them resistant to cannon fire, while their height made them an ideal platform for a single heavy artillery piece, mounted on the flat roof and able to traverse, and hence fire over, a complete 360-degree circle. A few towers had moats or other batteries and works attached for extra defense. The Martello Towers were used during the first half of the 19th century, but became obsolete with the introduction of powerful rifled artillery. Many have survived to the present day, often preserved as historic monuments. In the second half of the 19th century, there was another spate of tower and fort building, during the premiership of Lord Palmerston. These fortifications are therefore correctly called the Palmerston Forts, although, because they are circular in design, some confuse them with Martello Towers. Origins: Martello Towers were inspired by a round fortress, part of a larger Genoese defense system, at Martello Point in Corsica. The designer was Giacomo Pagliara Fratino, and the tower was completed in 1565. Since the 15th century, the Corsicans had built similar towers at strategic points around the island to protect coastal villages and shipping from North African pirates. The towers stood 1 or 2 stories high and measured 12 to 15 meters in diameter, with a single doorway 5 meters off the ground that one could access only via a ladder which the occupants could remove. Local villagers paid for the towers and watchmen, known as torrigiani, who would signal the approach of unexpected ships by lighting a beacon fire on the tower's roof. The fire would alert the local defense forces to the threat. On 7 February 1794, 2 British warships, HMS Fortitude and HMS Juno, unsuccessfully attacked the tower at Martello Point. The tower eventually fell to land-based forces under Sir John Moore after 2 days of heavy fighting. What helped the British was that the tower's 2 18-pounder guns fired seaward, while only the 1 6-pounder could fire landward. Vice Admiral Lord Hood reported, "The Fortitude and Juno were ordered against it, without making the least impression by a continued cannonade of 2 hours and a half, and the former ship being very much damaged by red-hot shot. Both hauled off. The walls of the tower were of a prodigious thickness, and the parapet, where there were 2 18-pounders, was lined with base junk, 5 feet from the walls, and filled up with sand, and although it was cannonaded from the height for 2 days, within 150 yards, and appeared in a very shattered state, the enemy still held out, but a few hot shots setting fire to the base made them call for quarter. The number of men in the tower were 33, only 2 were wounded, and those mortally. Late in the previous year, the tower's French defenders had abandoned it after HMS Lowestoft had fired 2 broadsides at it. The British removed the guns to arm a small vessel. Consequently, the French were easily able to dislodge the garrison of Corsican patriots that had replaced them. Still, the British were impressed by the effectiveness of the tower when properly supplied and defended, and copied the design. But they got the name wrong, misspelling Martello as Martello. When the British withdrew from Corsica in 1803, with great difficulty they blew up the tower, leaving it in an unusable state. Design and construction: the towers were about 40 feet high with walls about 8 feet thick. In some towers the rooms were not built in the center, but more to the land side, leaving the walls thicker on seaside. This is the consequence of a very unlikely attack with a cannon from the land side. Entry was by ladder to a door about 10 feet from the base, above which was a machicolated platform which allowed for downward fire on attackers. The flat-roof or turretline had a high parapet and a raised platform in the center with a pivot for a cannon that would traverse a 360 degrees arc. The walls had narrow slits for defensive musket fire. The interior of a classic British Martello tower consisted of 2 stories. The ground floor served as the magazine and storerooms, where ammunition, water, stores and provisions were kept. The garrison of 24 men and 1 officer lived in a casemate on the first floor, which was divided into several rooms and had fireplaces built into the walls for cooking and heating. The officer and men lived in separate rooms of almost equal size. A well or cistern within the fort supplied the garrison with water. An internal drainage system linked to the roof enabled rainwater to refill the cistern.